Hello and welcome to the IdeaCast interview series, episode number 101. My guest in this episode is Mary Hillebrand, and Mary is a writer and she's a teacher who enjoys teaching mindfulness to high school and adult students as well as other educators. And most recently, she is a co-author and co-editor of a book called Tears Become Rains, Stories of Transformation and Healing Inspired by Thich Nhat Hanh. And she co-authored and co-edited this book with Janine Coogan. And in this conversation, we examine not only the book, but we select a few of the short anecdotes or vignettes from the book. These are real life stories from people who have been dealing with challenges and adversity, and they find in those moments that the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh have helped them with their moving through those experiences with grace and being transformed positively as best can be by those experiences. So we talk about that. I speak with Mary about Thich Nhat Hanh as well. So it's a well-rounded conversation if you appreciate the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh, or if you're just in a place in life where you would love some inspiration. There are 32 separate stories here, and I believe you'll find something there that resonates with you. I very much enjoyed the book. So without further ado, let's bring Mary on and talk about the book. I'd like to welcome Mary Hillebrand to the IdeaCast interview series. I'm looking forward to an enlightening conversation, and Mary and her professional collaborating partner created a book called Tears Become Rains by an editorial process, so we'll discuss that in a moment. But Mary, welcome. So glad to have you here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's great being here.
Yeah, after reading your book, I'm glad to be in your company. So so I'm looking forward, as I said, to a really neat conversation. To the YouTube audience, welcome. I am glad to have you all here as well, and I hope you have good takeaways from this conversation. So welcome to all of you. So Mary, I'll be kind of traditional interview guy here for a moment, and we'll try to stay on course with discovery. And let's talk about you for a moment, and then we'll move into closer to the book. And but I want to maybe have my audience check in with you, and if you want to share anything about what led you up to creating a book.
Sure, yeah. So I've actually been practicing meditation in the Plum Village tradition, which is the tradition that follows Thich Nhat Hanh as a primary teacher, maybe, or his lineage. For about 22 years, I guess, since 2001. And so, that background came primarily from what seems to happen to a lot of people, which is when we're in a moment of personal or professional crisis, we start looking around for ways to handle it, ways to manage the things that we're struggling with. And I was really fortunate to have a visit from my older brother Eric at that time, and he had been starting to learn about Buddhism, and he mentioned it to me, and it sounded really interesting. And so that kind of started me off on my journey on my own. One of the things, just real briefly, that I think kind of slowed me down in the beginning, or gave me pause, was that I was raised in a family, along with my older brother, of course, that was very consistently Roman Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And even in my early adulthood, in my 20s, I was still, for some of those years, active as a Catholic, and teaching Sunday school and things like that, and really wanting to be able to stay connected to that tradition. But I was also finding that it wasn't meeting my needs spiritually, and yet I thought, gosh, I can't leave it. That's not okay. Or what would that look like? Or what will it do to my family? All those questions that go through our minds. And so the first book by Thich Nhat Hanh that I read is called Living Buddha, Living Christ. And it was just exactly what I needed to be able to be okay with not so much transitioning from one to another or leaving one behind, but bringing the two together so that, I could still see the ways that I have deep gratitude for some of the things that I was brought up with. Most definitely the example of my parents. My mom has a very strong spiritual practice still rooted in the Catholic Church. And my dad also was a consistent practitioner and also kind of a questioner and always looking at other philosophies and things like that and open to talking about it. And that's stuff that I grew up with, as well as, some of the real powerful teachings that Jesus shared with people, and the power of community. And what I discovered in Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings is a lot of similarity. And that was what he's talking about in that book, really, was, you don't need to let go of your tradition in order to open yourself to the power of mindfulness and mindful living. So that's where it all started for me.
Okay.
And around the time that I first started practicing was when I met Janine. And so she had been with the Washington Mindfulness Community in Washington, D.C. For several years before I found it, but that's where we met, was in a community together, and discovered a real bond of friendship, as well as sort of continuing to grow in the practice together.
That's beautiful. And so you and Janine, again, you birthed this book into the world as the editors and curators of these, was it 32 narratives, 32 vignettes? And I love how there's themes in the book. There's 7 separate themes, if you will, and maybe I think each individual reader, and I wanted to save this for later, but I'm just going to let it out now. Each individual reader is going to be touched by these stories and by the way you again curated these anecdotes and these stories, and they're deeply personal stories, and they're all over the globe, literally, these persons who are writing in. And yeah, to the audience, this book will resonate with you one way or another, whether it's overcoming childhood adversity or trauma from war or any of these kind of things, or end of life issues, whether it's you facing end of life or a partner that has passed or a family member by way of parented, brother or sister. So I say this to the audience, that there is something there. I connected with a couple of stories, mostly vicariously, just experiencing for a moment that person's journey and meshing with it, and then pulling back away and just being really touched and inspired. And I'll reveal those later. I had 2. They're not favorites, but I had 2 things that I thought that I would extract and share. So you and Janine got together on this book, and the introduction, you talk about a friend of yours named Susan, and I'm always curious about the title of a book. I had an author on before a couple of weeks ago, and it was called The Lost Coin. And I was like, what's this lost coin? And it's a Buddhist koan, right? And the coin lost in the river is found in the river. And there's wonderful ways to think about that, right? So the tears become rain. There's a revelation in the introduction, and I thought that was beautiful, and it relates to this friend of yours, Susan. So do you want to talk about like the synthesis project, or you and Janine working together to midwife this book into the world?
Sure. Yeah. The introduction, it's funny because that particular story was not the first thing that we thought of when we said to each other, okay, it's time to write the introduction. We've got all the other stories together. Really, we went through a lot of our experience of writing the book, and we started kind of hammering that out a little bit in terms of making notes and an outline that we could put into coherent sentences. But at a certain point, as we were talking about how do we want to explain this to the world, we realized that it's also really valuable for us to share a little bit of our own vulnerability and struggle. And, throughout, to the point where we got the book finally, what we considered finished, that took us 3 years.
Wow.
And throughout that time, it was this beautiful and continual process of being editors and scholars and at the same time being friends on the path as we experienced life while we developed a book, right? And so Susan came up kind of over and over again in different ways. And that was when we realized, well, gosh, you know, what really turned the tide for me, you know, from admiring this neat idea that Janine has to saying, oh, I need to be a part of this, was the fact that, you know, Susan had sort of brought us back together again. Janine and I and our families lived in DC at the same time. And then we all moved, you know, my family moved to Wisconsin, hers moved to Vermont. And so, you know, we were just sort of staying in contact off and on. And then, you know, having to go through the loss of our dear friend together, you know, brought the two of us closer together. It pulled other members of our old Sangha back in DC, you know, back together, because Susan was such a unifying person. She was so often the one who hosted the book group, or, you know, we need to have a special meeting to work on this little project. She'd be like, my place, come here, you know, everybody come here. And so, you know, Susan was this sort of hub person. And, you know, so I think, you know, it was the book project turned into unexpectedly a way to sort of heal from losing Susan as well. You know, and it was Janine's idea in the first place. I said, "Ooh, cool! This sounds great, but I don't know if that's, you know, I don't know if I'm qualified or whatever." You know, we all go through those moments of kind of wondering, you know, doubting, whatever. And but then, you know, when I finally decided to join in, Janine said, "Well, I was waiting for you to respond to my inquiry," because she had sent out sort of an inquiry to just, you know, a small group of friends who she knew were, you know, professionally involved in editing and writing, and I happened to be one of those. Susan was on that list too, and because that went out before she got sick, you know, so it just seemed like it was sort of meant to be, you know, and we learned so much in the process of doing that. And we're so glad, not only, obviously it's a book intended to continue Thich Nhat Hanh's legacy and his teachings, continue him as a person beyond his human body. But it also turned out to kind of be a continuation of Susan too. You know, her smiling and laughing and questioning things, you know, was something that we experienced throughout the process of you know, haggling over you know, edits and which stories to keep and stuff like that. You know, she was kind of always there as sort of the third editor.
In my own, and there's the theme of interbeing comes up a lot in the book, and so we, you know, to use another term, a synonymy is the Indra's web, or the interconnectedness of all things, and it really shows up in the book in its own layer of iteration, you know, because I would posit, and you can talk to this, that in the community, the Sanghas and the Plum Village, that there was a means available to you to connect with these people and extract, again, these 32 anecdotes. And also Thich Nhat Hanh being present in the narrative continuously as so I love the idea of extended mind and the continuum of intelligence, and that it's far more, you know, sort of abstract and nebulous in its manifestation, so that when somebody is ensconced in a book, to me, that's a form of an extended mind. So Susan, you know, again, lives through the book, or Thich Nhat Hanh lives through the book, and I just loved that idea. It's so romantic to me that these persons, our ancestors, are standing. You know, I always say that, you know, they're standing behind our shoulders, but literally in the book, they're there, they're alive, and they're telling the story with you and with all the other 32 people that contributed to the book. So to form a question out of all this, you know, was that a process of working within the, you know, the Plum Village community or the various Sanghas, or, if I'm saying that right, and how did you come to coalesce these beautiful vignettes?
Yeah, so when we decided to get started working, our first step was to actually craft the call for submissions.
Okay.
And what we knew for sure was that we wanted diversity. We wanted a broad array of topics to come to us. And we knew that we needed to reach out directly to the Sanghas around the world. And so, we sent our letter to the email address of every Sangha we could find. And what we said very simply, and maybe not even all that terribly clearly to our initial submitters, but what we said was, what was a moment that was your kind of aha moment where you realized that Thich Nhat Hanh was the teacher that works for you, was your teacher. And so, right from the beginning, we were framing it to them as, we intend this book to be a gift to him, but also a gift of him to the world. From the very beginning, we knew it was because his body was wearing out, and we wouldn't have him moving among us very much longer. He already had a stroke, and so he wasn't speaking anymore. And so, the people who sent us the stories knew right away, this is going to be a manifestation of that idea that you were just talking about, the continuation of a person, the interbeing of all of us. Thai, as we call Thich Nhat Hanh, it means beloved teacher in Vietnamese. Thai has often said that the next leader is the Sangha. He did not envision a sort of, hierarchy that, passes down from him or something like that. He said, you, the Sangha, are the leader of the practice going forward. And so this was our way of sort of pulling people together into what we have since sort of been calling, and our authors too, calling it sort of this little writer's Sangha, where we all do kind of interact a little bit and feed off each other. So that's where the idea came from. We sent the request out. We got back 100 stories.
Oh.
In about a month. We gave them a month's deadline, and we got 100 stories back. And so, step 2 was read them all. So Janine read them and I read them, and we each, independently marked them as yes, no, or maybe. And then we, kind of merged those lists and whittled it down initially to about, I think, maybe 40. And then from there, circumstances sometimes caused a few more to fall out, and 32 was what we went with. But that meant then we were basically forming relationships with those 32 people, primarily over email. Because as you mentioned, we have writers in 16 different countries. Yeah. So we're working over time zones and in several cases over some language barriers. So we had some people who stepped in to help us out with translations or with kind of interpreting for us as a go-between sometimes. But it was just such a beautiful experience for us that also I did not anticipate in the beginning. I didn't, when I started out, think, oh, by the end of this, I'm going to have interacted with 32 really neat people, and gotten the kind of communications back from these wonderful people who have a common language and a common practice with me all over the world. I feel like I got out of it so much more than I put into it. And we put in a lot of hours and a lot of work, and a lot of love. But man, the return was just phenomenal, life-changing. I will absolutely say it was life-changing for me.
I would suspect, yeah, because what I'm gathering, if I were to put myself in as a third wheel in your creation process, if I were immersed in this, I would be, again, and just reading the book, I was caught up in the life experience, the narrative, the feelings of these individuals, again, who have this spectrum of experience, and a lot of it ties to these common themes in our lives. And it's, it's the suffering, it is the challenge, it is the, some call it a dark night or whatever, but it's that there's these, intersections in our lives that we have to reckon with, death and loss and all these wonderful things that we go through as human beings. So in that process, I can imagine that it was very powerful for you to have to be involved in this and the power of these people's stories. So
Yeah, if I could, I know you probably have a nice long list of questions, but if I could just throw in one more thing that
yeah,
occurs to
by all
me
means.
about this, because as we continue now through this phase that is so unfamiliar to me and vaguely uncomfortable, which is like promoting the thing, but because we want to take it out there in the world, I continue to learn new things all the time as I think about this and talk to people and write about it for articles on the web. And one thing that I was thinking about today was, what a powerful repeated exercise in the depth of compassion and empathy this project was too. And I know from what we've heard from many of our authors that it was the same for them too, because as I mentioned, it took 3 years to get it done. So, we started out as these Janine and I, these outside looking into the lives and the experiences of the writers. So kind of touching that compassion for what they were going through, as you mentioned a minute ago, kind of putting yourself in the shoes of another person. And it's so powerful. And so that in itself, like we experience taking on their suffering and what that feels like, and ultimately feeling gratitude that we each, I know I'm kind of speaking for Janine here, but we've talked about it a lot, ultimately feeling gratitude that we each had the practice of mindfulness to hold that suffering that we took in from our readers. In several cases, we had readers who, and as people, as you've discovered, and as people will discover in the book, there's some pretty heavy things that people went through. And in several cases, when we first started out working with the authors, they weren't making it crystal clear. And so we needed to sort of, gently appeal to them to explain it better, to kind of go there if they can, so to speak. And so that was, kind of that exercise in empathy, where, you really have to be fully present with a person to be able to help them feel safe and, feel comfortable telling these stories that, they indicated to us from the beginning, I do have something here and I really want the world to have it, just not sure I want the world to have it. Not sure how I feel it now, it's a little bit of back and forth like that. So, it started out as that. And so we would, in some cases, be on the telephone with people, kind of talking back and forth about, what they felt like they could do and how we can word things. And by doing that, then it takes our relationship as editor and writer to a different level, where ultimately I had authors eventually asking me, am I okay? And there were times during this three-year process where we had to write to the authors, hey, we're sorry there's been such a long gap between communications, or, we know we were hearing from some of you wondering where the project is and if it's ever going to get done, but here's what's happened in our lives recently, and then we would get back from them so much kindness and empathy and gentle reminders of how to use the practice, because we're again coming from that common language and common practice together. Was just phenomenal. And hopefully some of that comes through in the book, we'll see.
Oh yeah, I think it does. And I'm glad you said what you said about perhaps having to have this sort of reciprocity with your authors to say, to coax things out of them, because suffering is intimate. It's also collective, as we are unfortunately well aware of through the history of humanity, that we have global suffering, right? Global suffering and so forth. It's a scale, but the personal suffering can be very intimate, I think, and that to me is a sharing. you know, that you have to, some people would be guarded about, and and feeling vulnerable, and that in itself is what a, you know, what a wonderful opportunity in that vulnerability to understand more about yourself and to test, you know, the boundaries of who you are as a person. I think that takes courage, you know, to do that, and it shows up
Yeah.
in the book. Yeah, it shows
Yeah,
up.
it really did give me such an appreciation for the courage that a lot of these authors exhibited. You know, because especially when we're asking them to go deeper into a specific area, or we're saying, you know, I don't understand, especially with authors whose language wasn't English, you know, primary
Yeah.
language wasn't English. We'd have some moments where like I'd be on a section of it and I would think, well, I think I know what they're saying here, but it's really good idea to ask, you know, are you sure before you move forward with it? And so I would ask them to clarify, and it's sort of like poking them in a bruise, you know. It's like, you know,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I have
Yeah.
to ask again because I
Right.
don't want to get this wrong, or, you know, something like that. You know, I
Yeah.
want to make sure that we get the story right. And so it's sort of, you know, keeping those painful points fresh with them. And they would just courageously come back with, no, I understand, you know, here's what I'm trying to say. You know, and sometimes they would write back, you know, I had to sit with this for a while before I could respond to you.
Mm.
You know, we had some authors experiencing physical illness during this process, and so we would get these emails back saying, sorry, I haven't been in touch for a while, but I've been undergoing like my fourth round of
Yeah.
chemotherapy or something, you know. And then they would still be like, but I really care about this book and I really want it to get out there in the world, and, you know, so tell me what to do and I'll help, you know. Just
Yeah.
amazing people. Yeah.
A few months ago, I heard a phrase that sticks with me every day, and it's probably mundane, but it's that ritual leads to transcendence. And so I'm seeing a ritual in the creation process and the authoring of this,
Mhm.
again, very intimate narrative of suffering. But in doing that, it gives you a sort of lensing capacity to maybe have that transcendent experience while you're perhaps through two languages trying to generate this story that that hopefully and I think I saw it show up in, you know, in some of the vignettes and the stories that were being shared, that these folks are, you know, kind of looking back at those that can look back. There's some others that, you know, we have authors in the book that didn't even make it to publishing, and I want them to be acknowledged too. But, you know, people who could reflect on the generation, that I would hope that ritual leads to transcendence.
Mhm.
Again, perhaps within the framework of the Sanghas and Plum Village, Thich Nhat
Mhm.
Hanh's teachings, but that's something that I would hope, you know, that came out for them in a positive, um, you know, frame.
Yeah, you know, to sort of put it in Thai's own language, you know, sure, ritual leads to transcendence, which could be simplified to joy,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
we've been talking about how hard the experiences of these authors were initially, having something happen in their lives that really caused them to draw deeply on the teachings, or go to find the teachings and recognize that that was what was going to help them. So, you know, they're in the midst of struggle. But you know, one of the most beautiful things to me about Thai's way of teaching mindfulness, or you know, the Buddha's original teachings, you know,
Mm-hmm.
reformed by Thai, is that emphasis on joy. You
Yeah.
know, that you know, yes, life is suffering, but also life is joy, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
and beauty. We can find it even in the midst of such deep struggle.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I definitely saw that in each of the stories that we got from our authors, that, you know, ultimately, and, you know, joy sometimes looks big and sometimes looks small, you know, but they were all able to use that practice and use the community, the Sangha, to come to a point of, you know, being able to see that there's more than just suffering. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and joy doesn't even have. Yeah, so I'll throw this out as a weird sort of echoing of what you just said. For me, joy doesn't have to be antithetical to suffering. That,
Mhm.
like you just said, that there can be suffering, and for me, I love the idea that joy arises rather than, it's something that's coming to you, that joy can arise.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that if you can be in suffering, whether it's a physical ailment or the loss of the of another, or just a troubled world, that to be able to activate and be receptive to a joyful moment or a period of joy, that
Mhm.
again emerges. And one thing I always like to throw out there as one of my little weird tangents is people who survive cancer and terrible situations with, atrocities, um, tend to have a really strong appreciation for the triviality of, daily life, or, so joy is more accessible in a sense that you don't take things for granted as much. If you're in remission of some kind of, terrible cancer experience, or you came out of something very traumatic socially or culturally, that if you are happy and joyful, that the value of that is exponential over maybe somebody who is living a kind of gee whiz life, and, not too much
Mhm.
coming up. So even
Sure.
that is suffering in its own right. But yeah, So anyway, I'm
Yeah, kind of a neat example of this idea of like joy within or right alongside suffering,
hmm
is the first story in the book. Eliza King tells about being blind
hmm
and how much difficulty and suffering that caused her in different ways in her life. And then there's this moment in the story where she says, you know, I learned that this idea of deep listening that Ty talks about, where we're not just, attentively listening, we are so fully present with the other person who's sharing that we're able to hear what they're saying and how they're feeling and what the kind of underlying message is. And she said, when she discovered that and realized that that's a much more heightened superpower, so to speak, for her because of her lack of vision and because of how she'd been treated because of her lack of vision. She felt so powerful in a like giving kind of way. She was like, I could show up for other people in a way that I had no idea I would be able to do. That's that kind of joy right alongside of, I mean, her vision was still bad,
Yeah.
like that didn't change.
Yeah.
But there she was, like, embracing this other way that she could, show up for people. It was
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah. It's almost like a psycho spiritual or psycho emotional alchemy where you can, sort of be moving along with a perception of something, and then you get the frame shift, like she had, and say,
Mhm.
this is part of my operating system all along, and I'm, now I'm
Mhm.
yeah, so
Yeah, yeah.
now
Oh
I'm
wow,
like,
look what I can do.
yeah,
you know
light goes on,
yeah, yeah,
metaphoric
it's
light,
really neat. Hmm.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So I'd like to share one of the stories that again touched me. Is Was it Jared Biebler? Is that how it
Mm.
was? And it was A Tiny But Perfect Cloud. And that's
Uh-huh.
one of those stories that ostensibly is deeply tragic. Um, and if you would like to share, because you could probably recite it better than I could, but yeah, that one really sat with me because I live a fairly boring life, and there's been stuff in my background that I could qualify as being, adverse, or I don't want to call it suffering, but yeah, it's challenges and opportunities for, stuff like that. But Jared's story really helped ground me in my humanity. And so, can you share a little bit of that? And we'll give the audience one or two vignettes, perhaps.
Yeah, would you like me to read it or kind of paraphrase it?
Do
Because
you
I've
want
got
to
the book.
do you want to read a
Yeah.
segment of it? Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, I think
Sure,
that would be
yeah.
neat. I think that
And
would
I'll
be neat.
just preface it a little bit with that was one of those stories that Janine often called, during our work meetings, kind of a gut punch story.
Yeah.
And Janine and I each had stories that struck us that way, different stories that struck us that way. And Jared's story, the timing of it, I don't know if you noticed this, I mentioned it briefly in the introduction, but the timing of Jared's story, and me working on it, that was one that fell into my basket first. We kind of divided them in half initially. I put it off and put it off and put it off because, it was the time to start working, hard on the individual stories came almost simultaneously with, in my family, the sudden loss of my beloved sister-in-law, Carla.
Okay.
My brother, Eric, who I mentioned earlier, who introduced me to Buddhism, it was his wife, and she was killed really tragically and suddenly. And so, Jared's story is so beautiful because it's so simple. Mm-hmm. And yet, anybody who reads it and reads it with their full presence can understand that there was nothing simple about his experience of this sudden loss in his life, but he tells it so beautifully. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm happy to read a bit of that if you want.
I think that would be neat.
Here. Yeah. You'd think I'd have it memorized where they all are at this point, but
it's
there we are. Yep,
okay.
Got it. 177. Okay. Yep. So it's Jared Bibler, who lives in Switzerland. He is originally American and was living in Iceland for a long time. Actually published a book about the Icelandic financial crisis, so that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Can't remember the name of it now, but little plug for Jared. But yeah, so it starts out with them in Iceland and Switzerland here, a tiny but perfect cloud. In the late summer of 2012, my wife Hulda and I decide to make a change after some years of struggle. It is a scary undertaking for us, but it also is a good time for transition. Hulda has just finished her degree. I have completed a number of huge projects at work, and we have not yet started a family. After talking for years about moving to Switzerland to seek a better life, we are at last putting the plan into action. We will do it in 2 phases. In phase 1, she will stay behind and keep her job and our apartment, just in case. I will move ahead to Zurich. Once I find a new job and a new apartment, she can join me. I leave Reykjavik by car in early September, just days before the first serious winter storm hits. I drive 750 kilometers around the northern half of Iceland to get to a place that I'm not going to pronounce properly, the departure harbor for the Norrona ferry. It is nearly 4 days at sea, and then once in Denmark, I must drive another 1,500 kilometers south across Germany to get to Switzerland. I have laid my groundwork well. Within a few weeks of arriving, I have a nice job offer that is a step up in my career. I start the new job a few weeks after that. In a brand new place where I need to learn a new language and miss having my wife by my side, I'm often very lonely. I find a small room to rent in a nice house, and my new job is very challenging. I spend long hours at the office. I tell Hulda she can come right away, but her boss will not say exactly when he will release her from her employment contract. In addition to taking care of closing up our old life in Iceland, Hulda may have to continue her job for up to 3 more months. We are frustrated, but we keep hoping. For many years, I had been drawn to Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings. I even read his book about love when I was much younger. Now, alone in Zurich, I stumble across an online announcement that his Dharma talks are being released as podcasts. The news is like a glimpse of cool water in my lonely desert. I download and listen right away. My first podcast is even in English and German, the language I happen to be trying to learn. Ty pauses after each sentence to let his soft-spoken translator shape the message into German. Right away, I find a new way to look at life. New episodes are coming out every few days, and they are wonderful. I listen to each one. I try a little walking meditation on my way home one night in my new Swiss town, and the experience is profound. The world of the present moment feels more vivid. I really see the old cobblestones of the street and the soft Christmas lights above for the first time. I listen to a podcast episode every day on the train, and then I listen again later when I'm falling asleep. The words begin to transform me. I start to feel peaceful, despite the stress of being in a new country, starting a new job, and experiencing lonely weekends. Hulda's boss makes her work until the final hour of the very last day of her contract. So we end up spending 5 long months apart. At last, we are reunited in our new country, and we move into a lovely new apartment together a week later. As we are falling asleep one night, I play her some snippets from the podcast. To my surprise, she immediately takes to it. She asks to hear it again a few evenings later. She especially loves to listen to the story of the cloud that never dies, the cloud that becomes a river or a lake and waves to us from its new form. One sunny Saturday afternoon, a few months after Hulda arrived and we began our new life together, my wife suffers a fatal accident. There is no way to save her. She dies instantly. I drive home, numb and shocked, and call her family in Iceland. Some friends come over to comfort me. I lie alone in bed late at night trying to fall asleep, but I experience a type and level of emotion I haven't yet faced in my life. Realizing what I need to do, I find the podcast and listen to Ty speaking about the cloud. With his peaceful and reassuring voice, everything clicks. In that moment, I feel the deep truth that Hulda has not disappeared, but continued. I am even able to smile about it a little bit. At last, I can get to sleep and experience a few peaceful hours. The next morning, I sit outside in the sun and try for the first time in years to practice sitting meditation. The lavender plants on my balcony seem to be waving to me in the breeze. I feel connected to my wife, even though she isn't here in a physical form. I can sense that she is here in other forms. A few weeks later, as I am thinking of Hulda, I see a single, tiny but perfect cloud in the otherwise clear evening sky. I'm going to stop there. There's a little more to the story, but I want to stop here because emphasizing this idea that a cloud never dies. This is something that Ty has talked about over and over again. He also talks about it in terms of a flame on a matchstick. You've got a matchstick, you think the flame's not there, but all the conditions are there except the one, which is to strike it, right? And then the flame appears. And when we blow that flame out, it's not gone, it's in a different form. There's smoke rising and there's a charred stick. And I so appreciated Jared sharing, that I'm sure, day after day after day, he still felt the stabbing pain, of losing his wonderful wife, especially after having both of them built up so much hope and excitement for what they were creating together. And that's something that everyone will experience in one way or another in their lives. We're all of the nature to die.
Yeah.
So that's one that I think a lot of people can probably connect to and gain something from.
Yeah, it speaks to our commonality, our tethering or interbeing. Death makes equals of us all, as they say. So thank you for reading that, though. I appreciate that, because like I said, that's they all touched me, but this one, the potency of what happened there again grounds me in my humanity. It keeps me from turning into a cold, uncaring person, which sometimes is good medicine, but not good medicine. Yeah. Sometimes you have to just pull back, but it's good to feel again that these people, all of us, like you said, will go through this at one point or another.
And I think that's one of the kind of underlying themes that comes through in the book, is that we do have to feel the things. If we want to live an awakened life, that means we're awake to the suffering. We're not looking away. We're trying to, let go of those habits of hiding in other things to avoid the suffering and the struggle, and instead, having that confidence and that groundedness to sit with the hard stuff and show up for other people and sit with them with the hard stuff. I think that comes through in a lot of the stories in the book. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This may be a lousy question, but was there a vignette or a story that, by no means like a favorite or a ranking system, but something that I don't know, that stood out to you? Was there anything there?
That's funny. I've been asked that question a little bit before, and my first thought is like, you never ask a parent to choose their favorite kid.
Yeah, that's
So
why I
know
asked
you're
it very
not asking for
guardedly.
that. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I know you're not asking for that. But what's funny is, like, you could ask me today,
Mm,
for a story that stands out, and then you can ask me again tomorrow. And between now and the time that you ask me tomorrow, something will have happened in my life where, in my brain, because I know these stories so well,
yeah.
I often laugh about this with Janine. I say, oh my gosh, all the time, something that I'm thinking about or something that's happening in my life makes me think, oh, that reminds me of so-and-so's story in the book, so I think lately one story that's been coming to mind a lot for me is Annette Sager's story. She's from Germany, and she writes about kind of struggling with this idea of having to say goodbye, knowing that we don't know whether we're going to see the person again or not. Which maybe it's coming up a lot for me because I'm getting older, and also, people in my life are getting older. During the production of this book, I lost my father. I had to say goodbye to him. My mom is, we're all getting older, so my mom is getting older. And so, it's really easy for me to relate right now to what Annette was writing about. And also, I just have such gratitude for the way that she shared the practice that she came up with for being okay with saying goodbye and not knowing, whether we want to face it or not, or whether we're reminded of it regularly or not. We all know the truth is that we don't know the future. It doesn't matter what we do. It doesn't matter how much worrying we do or anything like that. The future is not something that we can predict. And so there is a little element of sadness whenever we say goodbye, if we're feeling truly present with a person, knowing that could be it, who knows. And so Annette shared this practice of taking the person's hand between her two hands, and holding it, and just pausing and feeling it, and making that physical connection with the person, kind of like a hand hug, right? And I thought, man, and she writes about how it's something that she can do even with people who either are too frail to be actually physically hugged, or aren't too comfortable with hugs. And if we're really paying close attention, then hopefully we're tuned into that, whether someone really prefers a hug or doesn't prefer a hug, or and so, just this hand holding is this really intimate, kind thing that we can do. I really like it. Her story is just really simple, and illustrates that really well. And she also, within that story, she talks about how she shared that that practice, and the way that she has made that something that helps her find ease and calm when she's feeling anxious about letting go or saying goodbye. She shared that with Thich Nhat Hanh while he was still alive, and so they got to have this real special moment together. And I like that he said something like, your hand is in my hand and my hand is in yours, and so now we will always, go forward together, whether I'm here physically with you or not, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to think about that, you know, when I say goodbye to my mom, you know, after a visit, or you know, anybody, you know, in my life. You know, I know that I do carry them with me, so it's nice to have that reminder.
Mm, mm. For me, that speaks to the continuum I was talking about earlier. And sometimes it can be kind of abstract, like, you know, ancient literature preserves the mindedness of, you know, the wisdom or whatever of someone. But yeah, that moment of connection is reinforcing the history or the historicity of a relationship. I like
Mhm.
that. That really speaks well. And I think the same thing as I reach my the apex of my middle age. I'm getting past middle age now. It's sort of like I'm not going to live twice as long. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, memento mori is one of those things. I love it myself. Like you know, my mortality to me is like bring it on, you know. But the sentimental uh, rumination of the loss of the other. I have a partner, and you know, whether I go or they go, it's like, oh, you know, that will be a challenge. It'll be hard.
Mhm.
Or parents or other close people. Yeah, we have to.
Mhm.
It's not that you want to mentally rehearse it, but this connection is a salve that will come in handy later, so to speak.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, taking the time, you know, being able to sit with these stories at times when we're not immediately facing those challenges is also really nice, because it helps us sort of develop, you know, in Ty's language, you know, it helps us develop a practice, you know, or a way of thinking about these things before the chips are down and we've got to be able to draw on them, you know. So you know, these stories keep reminding us to just sit and breathe and stop and listen, you know. And when it comes to, for example, knowing that our loved ones are not going to be with us forever, or, you know, always accessible, or however that plays out, um, it helps me to remember to try more consistently to be fully present with them when I am with them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a twofold thing. It's I can be okay when they go. You know, it'll be sad and it'll be hard, but I'll have, you know, this nice practice to lean on. But part of being okay when they go for me is because I know that I've been able to be fully present with them when they were here. I think about that a lot with my dad.
Mm.
Um, you know, just, you know, if we pay close attention while they're in our presence, maybe we won't suffer from regret.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Which is part of the grieving process. Yeah.
Yeah.
That you'll have those histories that you can reflect on. Yeah. No, I
Mhm.
100% agree. I 100% agree that you know, it's still going to happen and you'll still ask those what ifs and all that, but then you can recall, you know, that, oh
Mhm.
my gosh, I had the presence of mind to, you know, to sort of
Mhm.
reify this relationship through connection and contact and positivity and wanting to be the best ex, you know, sister, brother, partner, whatever, you know, for this person, daughter, any of
Mhm.
those things. So yeah, I completely agree. Mary, an hour has passed, or we're sneaking up on an hour, and there's two more things I want to talk about.
Okay.
So um, I only reference time because I do want to try to cover two more things
Okay.
before we say goodbye. So the first thing I would like to talk about is, and I'm not asking this to put pressure on you, but where is this leading you? What do you think, whether it's you and Janine or you personally, have you stepped into a world now with the creation of this book that is inspiring you? And you don't have to commit yourself to anything, but just abstractly. I mean, what are you feeling? You know, what's your creation process radar
Sure,
looking
yeah.
like for the future?
Well, I can say that in these initial, you know, weeks and months as you know, the path unfolds in front of us. We launched the book October 10th,
Okay.
so it still feels really fresh to me.
Oh, yeah.
Janine has written 2 books before. This is my very first one.
Okay.
This is her third. So for me, I'm watching a brand new path
Yeah.
unfold in front of me, and so I would say, in the short term, I'm really excited by some of the chats that she and I have had about, how can we continue to put this book forward in the world? Not because we're trying to be like in your face all the time, hey, buy the
Yeah.
book or whatever.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, trying to get people to buy something as a Buddhist feels really
Yeah,
uncomfortable.
I'm sure, right? There's conflicts that arise from that.
Yeah, it's really strange, but also, I mean, the proceeds from sales of the book go to the Thich Nhat Hanh Foundation. So,
Okay.
Jeanine keeps reminding me of that. It's like, no, it's
It's a
okay
means. It's
to,
a
to
means.
keep,
Yeah.
yeah, it's another means of getting his work out there and also continuing his work through the foundation.
Yeah.
But so I'm really excited, and unexpectedly so. I didn't stop to think about what life post book publishing would be like, but I mean, I have a day job, but I love
Mm.
that, we're both able to spend time promoting the book, because promoting the book in this case means so many different ways to share the things that we learned, and share glimpses into these wonderful chunks of wisdom from all these authors. So obviously, I mean, I'm enjoying things like podcasts like this, but I've also done I've written some articles, kind of where I get to think about one particular aspect of life, of trying to live a mindful life,
Hmm.
and I write about that and I pull in pieces of the book, and so I can see myself doing a lot more of that. I'm absolutely a writer by nature. I love writing. I love using my voice that way. So more of that. I recently had the wonderful opportunity to co-lead a Unitarian church service,
Wow.
which I've never done before. I've been to a
Neat.
few Unitarian church services, but
Yeah.
I never thought, gosh, I'm a person who has enough wisdom to get up there and tell people stuff. But they said, oh, we love your book, and why don't you come and share? So I think maybe stepping into a little bit more of a public speaking or leadership role, as long as it's designed to continue continue sharing the teachings and sharing how my experience has been with them, so that other people can live a more joyful life. I'd love to do that.
Hmm.
We've also even kicked around the idea of maybe a volume 2 of this book,
Yeah.
because the more we go out and talk to people, do book readings or gatherings with different sanghas where we're sharing the book, that people will come up to us and say, oh, I have a story, or
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I remember my aha moment, and
Yeah.
we're very aware that even though this has got 32 stories in it, there are a lot of things that we haven't touched on yet. A lot of unique stories out there, and ways that continuing to share the stories can help people that this book doesn't do yet.
Mm.
So I think a volume 2 would be really cool.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
though, and maybe it wouldn't be a 3-year process this time. Maybe we won't have another pandemic dropped into the middle of it,
Yeah.
and
Let's hope not.
and we'll also use what we learned. I think we got much better at working on it together as time went on.
Yeah.
And I so loved my collaboration with Janine. She's so wise and
Oh,
so she taught me so much. She's just such a clear-headed, very, very focused, and good coach. She's a
cool.
coach.
Cool.
So yeah, I hope that that's in my future, maybe.
Yeah, I'll be sure to include a link to Janine where we can access information about Janine as well as you in
Mhm.
there. Because I did do some
Great.
cursory review of Janine's work, and I was like, oh, wow,
Mhm.
that's cool. As well as you, I have to
Mhm.
snoop around. It's almost like a stalking process when I research my people that I
Sure.
talk to. It's like stalk, 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 but it's all good. But yeah, it's so when we were talking earlier, I was like, what would a part two sound like? Rain becomes a river. That's like cliche,
I
but
know. Yeah, I don't know where the
right.
title would go from here.
Yeah, and the other thought that I had, and is certainly not to sort of impinge upon things, but a database of these stories, since we're in the age of the
Mhm,
interwebs and all this modern contrivance and stuff, that you could have
mhm,
some way that I think the way that people garner revenue is through like Patreon or PayPal or some kind of support. So if you crafted a database or a compendium of these stories and say, hey, if this is providing you with wisdom and insight, please consider, I don't know. That's
mhm.
just what I was.
Yeah, well, certainly, especially since as we were talking about, the one of the points or one of the goals of this book was to, generate, since it's a book and people buy books, generate money for the Thich Nhat Hanh Foundation.
Yeah.
And, that does make a lot of sense, to, invite people to contribute, steer even more funds to such a worthy cause.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that there will also be an audiobook version of this
Okay.
eventually, and so that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Mm.
It's in our contract anyway that Parallax has the rights to produce an audiobook, and a lot of people have said they think that would be really helpful. We also really need to get it translated into a
Yeah.
couple of other languages.
Yeah.
Our authors in Germany, for example, have said, it doesn't really sell that great here, like we're not hearing a lot of enthusiasm here because it's in English, and
Mm-hmm.
depending on where you are, you're not going to have a lot of English speakers. And we have authors from Spanish speaking countries, and we have one from Vietnam.
Yeah. Yeah.
So translations, I think. Oh, we have one from the Czech Republic.
Yep.
And she's saying, hey, can we get a Czech translation eventually? And I said, yeah,
Mm.
will you help us with it?
Right, right. Well, I would see it being somewhat feasible in an audio format that, having a reader in that tongue
Right.
to do that would be great. Maybe
Mhm,
static paper publishing might be a little more challenging, just
mhm.
feasibility wise or cost wise. But yeah,
Yeah.
audio, that would be really neat. And the other
Mhm.
thing, I'm sorry, I'm just a spaz, so I just think of things. It's like, wouldn't it
I'm
be
happy to
neat?
hear your ideas for
Well, wouldn't
sure.
it be neat in that if you came up with again a website or whatever you want, an app or whatever it is, that was this storehouse of these stories, that it could be those who are willing could do it in their own voice, and that would be
Mhm,
powerful. Yeah. So
mhm.
anyway, I just think of
Yeah,
all these
for
weird
sure.
things. Um, all right. So
Sorry. I should add one more thing that
yeah,
actually
yeah.
really has a bit more immediacy to it. So I did throw together a kind of bare bones website, just so that we could have a presence. But what Janine and I have been talking about, as one of the main reasons we want this website is because we would like to start blogging about this stuff, because not only like our process and how it's been going, promoting the book, but we're often asked by our publicists to write an article about a particular thing so that they can send it to a particular place on the web or whatever. And we realized, gosh, why does it only have to live there? We're constantly, as I mentioned earlier, I'm constantly having realizations of things in my own life or my own practice that connect to certain things in the book.
Yeah.
So I would love to be weaving those together all the time in short, short blog pieces. It's basically like similar to these, little short stories where people can just drop in and get a little boost of mindfulness wisdom that can help them continue to build their practice.
Yeah, yeah. It's just a branch of that inner being, or a nest.
Mhm.
I see a nested doll, it's like you're taking a theme or a narrative or a concept and just iterative forms
Mhm.
arise with it. Yeah. So, oh
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
that's
so
just
many
great. You
different
just,
ways to show up for people,
yeah,
with
yeah,
this.
yeah.
Mhm.
And the world will benefit from it for
I
sure.
hope so.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it will.
Mhm.
Okay. So the other thought that I was inspired by something you said earlier, and it relates to your story. And there was a story within the book that may be adjacent to this, and that is you were talking about having been raised in Catholicism, as was I. I fell out at 15. Yes, I was very very rambunctious. My mother called me one day and she, are
Or
you still?
paying attention.
Well, yeah. So I was more of a hedonist. And my mother called me one day and I was living with my father and she's like, are you still going to church? And I'm like, no, no, getting together with my friends, getting high. That's more my prerogative right now. So, sorry.
Sure.
I didn't say that to her, but I was like, that's what I was doing. I was like, no, we go down because
Mhm.
I lived in DC at the time and we'd get on the subway, we'd get blazed up and go down to the art museums and stuff.
Oh, wow.
A lot more inspiring. But anyway, what I
Yeah.
did, I was very forthright with her, and she was, I think, more of a cultural Catholic. She just, wanted the performative, the sort of the ceremony, which is cool. Ritual is cool. But anyway, yeah. So, but to reel myself back in for a second, it sounds like there's been somewhat of a synthesis project, and some of the people that I have found over the years that really inspire me are these sort of Buddhist Catholic synthesis folks like Richard Rohr or John Butler and these guys that are sort of non-dual Catholics. And
Mhm.
I love that Creole, that synthesis. And I think Joan Malone in your book had been both
She
Catholic
was a
nun,
nun. Uh-huh.
a rebel rouser, which
Hmm.
would her opposite number would call her, and then she dealt with addiction,
Hmm.
and then she arrives with studying Thich Nhat Hanh and falling into a wonderful path for herself. So
Hmm.
combining all of that together, if you will, share with me some reflection on, for the audience's sake, the idea of bridging two sort of metaphysical worlds or spiritual practice worlds or wisdom tradition worlds, and
Hmm.
how it's possible, how it's feasible.
Sure. Yeah. And I can only speak
Yeah.
for my own experience of it. But yeah, we have a few people in the book who write about having been there, and then the pendulum swung a little back maybe toward the middle. Um, for me, I would say that um, I I've actually had to give a lot of thought to, okay, what is my relationship with the two different practices,
Hmm.
and can I find intersections that are comfortable for me, especially because I am very close to my mom, and she is still very committed to her Catholic practice, and so we've had some deep discussions recently as my book has come out, and it has sort of opened her eyes a little bit to this is how serious this is for me, that
Hmm.
I've spent years of my life on building this practice and working on this book, for example, and yet at the same time being able to reassure her that this doesn't mean that I'm trying to run around trashing Catholicism or something like
Right.
that.
Right.
What it is for me is, you know, my Catholic heritage is still a whole lot of positive memories, even as I still grapple and still struggle with the ugly realities that are also part of the Catholic
Yeah.
Church, and the worldwide power and wealth of the Catholic Church used in ways that I'm not happy about. But for me, I grew up in a parish that, among other things, exhibited a whole lot of caring and giving, of generosity, um, and strong community, and examples of people showing up for each other, and
Hmm.
people working hard and sticking together. And those things are still values that are super important to me, even if I don't choose to go sit in a Catholic church or something like that. For me, what I've found in the mindfulness practice, especially with Sangha gatherings, is that it's just a much more personalized experience for me.
Okay.
But it has also helped me to understand that everyone wants more or less the same thing, right?
Mm.
We all want to be at peace, and we all, want some help with that somehow. some of us aren't ready to take a lot of steps on that path yet, and some of us are. And that path is going to go where it's individualized. It's going to go where it has to go for each person. But I do feel like, having grown up that way and now, spending much more of my time in the mindfulness practice, helps me to just see our commonality.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's tricky. As I think is true with, there are a couple of other people in our book who write about, that challenge of, wanting to stay connected to their original traditions or culture. Nell Houtman writes really eloquently about, trying to understand her father, and, trying to be seen by her father, and having to kind of do the work over time and eventually coming back together. I think that's true for a lot of us. And I don't want to allow something like ideologies or dogmas to stop me from being present with the people in my life, the people I love, but also the people that I meet. I will go wherever somebody wants to talk.
That's beautiful. And thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that, because again, I say that I'm drawing this out of us for the audience. If there's somebody here observing this conversation and sort of asymmetrically participating in it just by observing, that if they're struggling with that, if there's something going on, a conflict or whatever, that it's natural, it's normal, and I think you can have a balance or a synthesis project that to me is brilliant and beautiful. I love the idea of this enmeshing of wisdom traditions and the oscillations that can occur. And if I were to, and I had my revelation a moment ago, if I were to reach out to my 15-year-old self, I'd put my arm around his shoulder and I'd say, look, buddy, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing right now, but you'll come around and see the value in something that, again, if we bracket all the controversy and the things that are shadowy about it, that there is still something to be salvaged or something to be respected and engaged with there. And that's my feeling about Catholicism now, or Christianity in general, is that there's a lot of value and beauty in there. And I also appreciate the macro mythos of it, that this is part of our human narrative. This is, especially in the Western Hemisphere, as we call it, that this is something that's there, and there is wisdom to be extracted from it. So for me, that's the great value in it. And I love mysticism, the narrative and the story. In fact, if I were to set foot in a Catholic church, I've said to myself recently that I would love to go to a Latin mass where I don't understand what the hell they're saying, but it's, again, ritual, and it's the liturgy, and it's all this process, the processorial pageantry and all this stuff. That just, I think it's really neat, and that creates communion, that creates a reciprocal opening, if you will, where you're, as the observer, you're engaged with it. So yeah, there's so much to be had there. So
yeah, and I think that it's possible to show up for the people in our lives who may be practicing in a different tradition than us. There's true value in that.
Yeah.
I mentioned that Unitarian service that I was a part of on Sunday. My mom came to that, and that was on a Sunday morning when she would have been at church. So she made sure she went to church Saturday night so that she could come here and be with me. She showed up for me, and experienced a very different, version of sitting with our spirituality and sitting in community than what she's familiar with. And it meant the world to me, to be able to do that. And she's been a real powerful example, especially in recent years, of continuing to be open even when it's uncomfortable. And I think that's a really nice thing about Buddhism, for example, is there is no joining Buddhism. You don't join, you don't go through something. You mentioned, like, if there are people listening today and they're wondering, like, how do I balance this or that? there's no, you have to leave that and come to this.
Okay.
And that is different from, what my experience had been with Catholicism.
Sure.
Where the messaging had often been, well, you want to be a member of this congregation, you need to be able to do this and this, and you can't be this and can't be that. There were these kind of contingencies. But the way Buddhism works is like, hey, be fully present wherever you are, whatever you're doing, and look for that interbeing, that connection with other people. How can you be fully present for yourself and for other people? Because that's how we, relieve people's suffering. That's how we find joy ourselves and with other people.
Mm, mm. Mary, this has been a beautiful conversation, and reading your book has been a it's a connection for me, right? It's all these extended minds that I was talking about earlier. It's all these minds connecting with me and my feeling their emotions and their feelings and sharing just a moment of being in their presence. And so thank you for putting that together, and thank you to Janine for that. And to the YouTube audience, I will have not to go into some kind of cheap, cheesy plug, but I will have all the contact information down below for Parallax Books, or where you may find these books available. But I think, as I said earlier, that no matter who you are or what your background is, that there's a commonality here. There are threads that you will work with and connect with, and there will be good takeaway for you. So I would suggest that you be curious and look into that. So
yeah, really, anyone could pick up this book. You don't need to already think you're on a spiritual path, or you don't need to think of yourself as a mindfulness practitioner. Anyone can pick this up and find something that is valuable.
Yeah. Our humanness is baked into that book. So
yeah, exactly. If you're human, you'll get something out of this. Dogs, I'm not sure,
maybe not.
but humans definitely.
If we could decode and have like human to dog translation, some
right?
dogs
Yeah,
might
who
relate.
knows? Maybe
They'd be
they
like,
do have some opinions.
yeah, right. The dog would be like, yeah, I get this. I'm now feeling more enlightened about this. So, but Mary, thank you though. I appreciate your presence here, your conversation with me, and the product that we've just created that will be distributed into the world, much like your book. This is an extension of that. So I want to honor that, and just here's to its success. And again, as you said, not so much this, fistfuls of money or gain or whatever, that it's the success of changing lives and trajectories and opening up perspectives for people. That's what I would aspire to, again, for this conversation, but as well as for your book. So but yeah, deep gratitude to you for being here. I appreciate it.
Well, it's been a true joy and honor to be on your show, and thank you so much for just giving it such careful attention and doing the work that you're doing. I've like I said, I've checked out some of your other podcasts, and I just think the kind of work that you're doing and the time you're spending on it to really get deep into these issues is a real gift to the world. So, thank you for being on that same journey with me.
Thank you, Mary. I appreciate that. Yeah. And I do that for my fellow persons in the sense of interbeing and the interconnectedness.
Right?
It's not, exactly. So, all right, Mary, I will say goodbye to you after we stop record. To the YouTube audience, thank you all so much for your attention and your time. And I do hope that either this conversation or the book has a positive impact on your life. So be well, everyone. Take care. And like I said, Mary, let me find the stop record thing here, and we'll say goodbye to each other.